It had been months, maybe longer, since I heard anything from them. Then out of nowhere, a message from my mother. Dinner at the house, 6 p.m. Everyone's coming. That was it. No warmth, no apology, no context. Just a command dressed as an invitation. Still, I went. I told myself maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe someone finally saw me. The daughter who always said yes, who wired money at midnight without being asked, who stayed quiet at every holiday table because you know how your brother gets. I wasn't delusional. I was just tired. Tired of waiting for a version of my family that didn't humiliate me for sport. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have. Not to look pretty, just to look like I had it together. A navy blouse, black slacks, small earrings. Nothing dramatic, just clean. Collected, forgiving. Driving up to the house felt like pressing rewind on every memory I tried to outgrow. Same brick path. Same porch swing that creaked like it was groaning from the weight of every word that was never said. Inside, the place was warm, but not in a way that made you feel welcome. More like a museum where everything was preserved for the past. Family photos lined the hallway walls. In most of them, I was there, but always at the edge, a little out of focus. I was the last to arrive. The dining room was already buzzing. Plates clinked, wine glasses half full. My sister laughed too loudly at something my brother said. My father glanced at me, then back to his food like I was a piece of old wallpaper no one had the heart to scrape off. I took the empty seat left for me. They talked about everything and nothing. My brother's new truck, my sister's trip to Cabo, the grandkids. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when expected. When I mentioned I'd been promoted, again, my mother blinked twice and reached for the salt. Not one congratulations, just the clink of a shaker. Then came the casual cruelty. My sister asked, "Still living alone?" With a smile too tight to be innocent. My brother chimed in, "She likes her space. Can't mess up what's already quiet." Everyone chuckled. I didn't. I'd been here before, a dozen times, 100. I used to think if I just kept showing up, they'd eventually see me, but all they ever saw was someone they could talk over. Still, something was different this time. Not with them, with me. Halfway through the meal, my brother leaned back and said, "You know, the business remodel would have been a disaster without that generous help." Then he looked at me. So did everyone else. They waited for me to nod, or maybe to smile modestly and say, "It was nothing." But it wasn't nothing. For years, I had been quietly covering my parents' bills, their leaking roof, their car repairs. Even the last hospital stay when Dad refused to use his Medicare because I'm not some charity case. I did it because I thought it would bring me closer, like every transfer was a handshake, a silent, overdue thank you. Instead, my mother raised her glass and said, "Well, the least you could do. I mean, you don't have kids, or a real family anyway." I couldn't even swallow the water in my mouth. It wasn't the words. It was how easily she said them, like they'd been rehearsed, like she had waited for the exact moment when they'd hit hardest. That's when I felt it, my chest tightening, my limbs heavy. I wasn't even angry, just cold, like the blood had left my hands. I remembered the first time I sent them money. It was after a late call from Dad about a plumbing issue. I offered. I thought it would make him proud. I thought being useful meant being loved. Dessert came. I didn't touch mine. They moved on to talk of inheritances, long-term plans, who would take care of what. I cleared my throat and said, "I've been thinking I might step back from the support stuff. Focus on myself a little more." Silence. No polite pushback. No concern. Just my father, setting his fork down, looking at me with something like disgust. Then he said, "The best gift would be if you just died." There was no yelling, no dramatics, just a flat, cold sentence that landed in the middle of the table like a brick, the kind that cracks porcelain and splits skin. No one told him to stop. My sister reached for another sip of wine. My brother scratched his beard. My mother adjusted her napkin. No one defended me. Somewhere between disbelief and numbness, I stood. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even blinking, just breathing. Slowly. I said nothing, just grabbed my bag and walked out. Back at home, I sat at my kitchen counter. The room was still. My laptop glowed in the dark. I logged into the joint account I'd been using to cover their expenses: mortgage, insurance, grocery reimbursements, monthly automatic transfers. One by one, I clicked cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click felt like a breath I hadn't taken in years. Then I opened a note I had saved but never finished. A simple list: dates, amounts, purposes. Every payment I'd made for them since I turned 25. No more guilt. Not tonight. I looked at the final line. Because I thought love could be bought. Then I added another. Now I know better. I hit save, closed the laptop, and for the first time in years, I slept without clenching my jaw. I woke up with no memory of the drive home, just the familiar shape of my apartment ceiling, the hum of the fridge, and the sharp contrast of silence that didn't comfort. It accused. I didn't know how long I had been lying there, maybe all night. My keys were still in my coat pocket, my shoes still on. His words replayed in my head, not just once, but over and over, like some broken broadcast stuck on a loop. The best gift would be if you just died. It wasn't just what he said. It was that no one flinched. No one stood up. No one even looked surprised. I checked my phone. Nothing. Not one text. Not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Jolene or a pity call from my brother pretending to care. Just digital silence. Cold. Clinical. I sat at the edge of the bed and thought, silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's a strategy, and when it's used often enough, it becomes an agreement, a quiet pact. And suddenly, everything clicked. The way they'd always let things slide. The jokes that weren't jokes, the glances, the avoidance. It hadn't started last night. It had always been there. I pulled out an old notebook from my drawer. I didn't write to vent. I wrote to record. A personal ledger, not just of events, but of how I used to explain them away, and how now I couldn't anymore. When I was 7, I crashed my bike on the sidewalk. My knee bled through my jeans. I remember crying, not because it hurt, but because my brother laughed. My mom didn't even check the cut, just told me, "Stop crying, you'll embarrass yourself." Then in high school, when I got that scholarship, I thought it'd be a big moment. Finally, something we could all be proud of. My siblings barely looked up from their dinner. "You're not better than us, you know." I laughed along back then. I wanted to belong more than I wanted to be seen. These weren't isolated incidents. They were instructions. A rule book I was never told, but expected to follow. Stay small. Don't shine too bright. Don't make them feel like less. If I followed it, I got silence. If I didn't, I got punished. I decided I needed to see Jolene. She lived in Dallas, not far, really. I didn't even call ahead. I just got in the car, half hoping she'd surprise me, that she'd say she'd been shocked, that she couldn't sleep either, that she wanted to talk, really talk. She opened the door with a smile, too wide, too bright. "Hey, stranger!" She hugged me like we hadn't shared that dinner table just hours ago. We sat in her sunlit kitchen, tea on the counter, her husband in the garage, probably pretending he couldn't hear us. I got to the point quickly. "Did you hear what Dad said?" She paused, stirred her tea. "He didn't mean it like that." "I didn't ask what he meant. I asked if you heard it." She sighed. "You always take things so personally." That's when I felt it. Rage that didn't explode, but settled into my bones like a decision. "So you agree with him?" She looked away. "It's not about agreeing. We all know how Dad gets. You poked him. And that justifies it? Don't twist my words." I leaned forward. "Did you know he was going to say that?" Silence. That silence was an answer. My voice didn't rise, but it cut. "You all talked about me before the dinner, didn't you? About how to deal with me." She didn't deny it. Her words were slow, deliberate. "We agreed not to provoke him. You always take things too far. It's exhausting." I sat back, hands folded. So there it was. The unspoken pact. Not just silence, but complicity. A whole system built on, don't rock the boat, even if it meant letting someone drown. You chose comfort, I said, and I was the cost. Jolene stood up. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. I walked out. The drive back felt cleaner than the drive there. No confusion, just clarity. When I got home, I opened my laptop, deleted the family group chat. Gone. Then I opened a blank email. Subject line, termination of financial contributions, effective immediately. I listed everything. Dates, amounts, accounts closed, clear, cold, final. The last sentence read, silence may be your comfort, but it will no longer be funded by my pain. I didn't send it yet. I just saved it. I thought to myself, you don't fight fire with fire. You step back, let it burn down, and while it crumbles, you build elsewhere, quietly, stronger. I pulled into the parking lot at work, feeling off. Something in the air felt heavy, not because of the weather, but because I had brought my past with me, tucked under every shirt, in every car ride. I parked, locked the door, and forced myself to focus on case files, business law, contracts, motions, but my brain drifted. The hallway smelled of printer ink and stale coffee. I heard muffled footsteps, whispered, "Did you see that post?" My hands went cold. I tried to concentrate on the spreadsheet open on my monitor. My eyes flicked to a message notification. Family issue trending. From a coworker, no name, just saw something about you. My heart thumped, not with panic, but with that unsettling awareness. They're preparing me for judgment, without asking, without offering defense. Alone in my office, I shut the door and opened my laptop. The glow startled me. An email from a cousin I barely talked to, a Dropbox link in it. I clicked. The voice of the dinner. My voice, twisted, edited. It made me sound hostile. My parents' victims. Silence from them. Caption underneath. She's unstable. Needs help. My stomach dropped. Because what felt sharp wasn't the misrepresentation. It was knowing they didn't care whether I'd be ruined. The cousin's message included a warning. Uncle Arthur wants to take me out of the trust. They believe I'll file something. Legal, emotional, spiteful. I exhaled, softly. My office window caught the sun, but it didn't warm me. It mocked me. Later, in my living room, I reviewed every odd conversation lately. The way Aunt Linda asked if I was okay mentally these days, with a forced smile. How relatives whispered when I arrived, stopped when I passed. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. A plot built over months. I remembered signing trust paperwork once, when Silas said it was just routine. Then another time, when someone asked me to release medical records for a fundraiser. I did it, never questioning. Always trusting. And then they used my vulnerability for their narrative, my journal entries, my past fears, someone's proof that I cry, that I hurt. They grabbed every soft edge of me and plastered it into a display, as if that were the story they wanted. I closed the journal. I never wanted my doubts exposed like evidence. Sitting there, I felt doubt creep in too. What if I've been too sensitive? What if I do sound unstable? But then I caught a sentence I once wrote for a client. They believed in me when no one else did. That reminder stung more than shame, because it reminded me of strength I had, loyalty I earned, gifts I gave when no applause came. I didn't reply to family messages. I didn't post anything. Instead, I built something quiet. Files, backups, screenshots, copies of everything, statements, receipts, emails. I prepared, not for a fight, for truth. I closed the blinds as dusk fell. My phone buzzed with news alerts. Someone had shared the audio clip with thousands. I didn't watch the numbers climb. I turned off the phone, walked to the window, looked at my reflection in glass. Someone I used to know was there, small, always apologetic. But tonight, she was grounded, different, less afraid. No speeches yet, no confrontation. Just a decision in the bones. If they want a story, I'll write mine. The day after I posted that message on social media, I walked into the office expecting sideways glances. I wasn't wrong. My assistant, Lorraine, looked up when I slid into my desk and immediately dropped her eyes. I overheard someone whisper, "Did you see that post about her funding?" I clenched my jaw and tried to focus. Files, contracts, client calls, Every task felt heavier. When I opened my phone, notifications showed threads. She's playing victim again. She wants attention. One message thanked me for funding a local art show, then accused me of publicity stunts. I stilled, because help turned into a stage and I wasn't asked to perform. At lunch, I checked my bank app. One of the automatic payments I set for the community center had bounced. Not because of lack, because someone reversed it. I scrutinized statements, tracing a pattern of redirection. My support for their repairs, their bills, portions of it were being rerouted under someone else's name. I asked Lorraine quietly, "Did you authorize these transactions?" Her voice dropped. "They were approved by Dad." Betrayal crackled inside me. I gathered receipts, saved digital statements. I felt cold fury, not because of money, but because the trust I believed in had fracture lines. I built something meaningful with every check. Now documents denied me those roots. Later that afternoon, I drove to the community center. A banner stretched across the front. The Vale family, generations of service. Pictures of siblings, parents, donors, glossy faces lined the wall, but mine was never in frame, even though I financed half the programs advertised. I listened as the host of a local radio segment spoke about the Vale legacy. Only Cormac was named. He was praised. My name was omitted quietly. A neighbor approached me as I left. She squeezed my hand and said, "You must be proud. They speak your name everywhere behind the scenes." I nodded, but pride felt heavy. Invisible contributions sting because what remains unseen shapes the foundation of identity. On the way home, I thought about words I once read from Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. The sting tightened. Losing money was one thing. Losing presence, that deeper shift, erased more. Back in my apartment, I sat at the desk, lit by lamplight. I drafted an email to the board of the community projects, dates, receipts, programs I funded. My name attached where it was always meant to be. I considered legal options, defamation, contract clauses in our family trust. Jessie called. She offered help with research. Tanya offered to publish my op-ed. My chest felt tight. I feared backlash. I feared shame. But more than fear, I felt something like resolve, justified anger. My heart remembered every moment I stepped back so their shadows could appear stronger, every time I swallowed pride to avoid a scene. I rehearsed my voice in the mirror. Once I imagined speaking calmly, clearly, when all eyes were on me, exposing the cracks, not appeasing the silence. Then I made a choice. I posted a short message. All receipts, all dates, my name is not invisible. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Some messages supportive, others skeptical, defensive. Then Silas called, his voice tight. He asked why I spread half-truths. I paused. My finger hovered over record call. I didn't respond yet. I just held that moment, half hesitation, half power. I arrived at the gala just as the sun slipped beneath the buildings, casting long shadows over the valet line. My dress was modest, tastefully pressed, black enough to fade into the background, sharp enough to remind them I showed up on purpose. I walked in, and for a moment, time paused. Board members stood around, Lenora greeting donors, Silas exchanging handshakes. Cormac was introduced as the one keeping the Vale legacy alive. My name, my work, ignored. I slipped into a seat at the far right row. A few people I helped offered smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I wondered if they were afraid of being seen with me. My pulse stayed calm. I'd done this before. I could endure. As dinner progressed, the lighting dimmed and the stage lights came up. Unexpectedly, Silas stepped forward. He took the microphone, voice steady. He said he had concerns about my emotional well-being. Slide after slide flickered, tears at last year's fundraiser, texts that came off strong, moments of erratic behavior, each framed by images I barely recognized. Gasps echoed. Someone laughed. I stayed seated, throat tight. He said, "We love her. That's why we've asked for professional guidance." A therapist I've never met stood beside him, offering solemn advice about stepping in before it's too late. I didn't stand. I didn't accuse. I pressed the voice memo app on my phone and let it record. After applause died down, I found myself outside among valet cars and candles lining the entrance. Jolene appeared, heels clicking. Her smile was brittle. "You know they only did this because they care," she said. I responded, "Care sounds loud when it's done publicly." She paused, looked at me, and dropped the mask. "Don't push this, Ari. You're one move away from losing everything." My breath stilled. I pulled out my phone, played the recording. "So are you," I said. The threat hung between us like smoke. They weren't just willing to manipulate, they were willing to ruin me publicly. Under chandeliers, before applause. Outside, where everyone's eyes were on them. Back in my car, I sat behind the wheel for a long moment. My hands shook. I plugged the audio clip into a secure drive. Sent it to Tanya. I wrote a short reflection about the intervention as a public sham. I made calls to explore legal options, defamation, wrongful reputation harms. I reached out to an old counselor. She agreed to write me a support letter. No record of instability. I lined up donations, invoices, meeting notes, evidence. Shame trembled in my chest, but something else was steadier. Anger, yes, but also resolve. When you've been gaslit so many times, the smallest proof breaks the silence. Just before midnight, my phone lit up with a voice message. Uncle Marcus. His voice quiet but serious. I saw what they did tonight. You're not the first. And you won't be the last, unless you fight. I listened twice. Realized this was never just about me. My story was one of many. And for the first time, I had confirmation. Not that I was alone, but that I wasn't wrong. The walls I built to stay small had cracks. The first one was tonight. Morning came too early. I woke with tension in my chest, as if I could sense the storm before it broke. My assistant called. She said inspections were at the community center. Permits. Paperwork. Something was off. I drove over fast enough to see inspectors blocking the entrance. Their faces were official, stern. I asked what was wrong. They handed me a notice. They claimed the permits filed in my name were falsified. Someone else had signed them. My heart sank. I showed them receipts, original filings, screenshots, proof. They stared. One inspector hesitated, almost sympathetic. Then a voice behind me whispered, "Someone from your family said you were mentally unstable. To be careful." That cut deeper than anything. I remembered the threats last night, whispered warnings. This wasn't an accident, it was design. Back home, I spread documents over my kitchen table, digital files, old trust papers, correspondence. I called Marcus. I called Tanya. I told them everything. Marcus said he'd pull anything public tied to the trust law. Tanya scrolled through emails and flagged records. One name kept recurring, Redford, our family lawyer. Always conveniently appearing, always drawing lines no one questioned. I found digital signatures that looked almost too neat, timestamps that made no sense. Someone had built a case to gaslight me, then erase me from control. Then came emails, press inquiries from outlets I never contacted. An anonymous tip had accused me of mismanaging funds. A fake press release began circulating, supposedly from my own foundation, claiming I admitted fault. I saw texts from donors, partners, friends. Is this true? What's going on? My phone rang off its hook. I took a breath and posted a statement. This isn't a scandal. It's a strategy to silence those who ask too many questions. Then I shared partial proof, just enough to make people wonder, but not enough to burn bridges yet. That afternoon, I drove to the community center. Volunteer staff stood outside, heads bowed. They were scared. I approached quietly. I told them, I won't ask you to stand with me. I'll ask you not to run when I start standing alone. A young volunteer pressed a USB into my hand. Footage. A private security camera caught someone tampering with paperwork, signatures forged, filings overwritten. I recognized the posture, the coat, Jolene. I froze. Not from shock, but from recognition. Because now I knew they weren't just erasing me, they were rewriting me. I leaned back, voice low. The anger was colder now, purposeful. You pushed too far, I said. Not to her, to all of it. To every betrayal pretending to be tradition. To every conversation I swallowed. To every dollar I quietly sent so their story would look whole. That night, I crafted a teaser for my foundation's website. This Friday, 7 p.m. Full transparency. I typed a message to Jolene. You always underestimated how deeply I document. My hands shook. I hesitated. I almost deleted it, but I didn't. A notification popped up. Tanya sent me something. A transcript. A call between Redford and Silas. The words were so calm, so cold. Discussions about how to limit my role, how to control the narrative, how to spin the loopholes so it looked like I agreed. I reread it. Knowing what I held, I felt for the first time a power they couldn't gaslight. They planned to take everything, and then make me thank them for it. The house smelled the same, old wood polish and lavender, just like every Sunday dinner we used to fake our smiles through. I came for my spare keys and a few contracts left behind. That was the excuse. But I guess I also came to see if the place still felt like home. It didn't. As I passed the hallway, I stopped. That wall had always been our legacy wall. Photos from decades of events, galas, birthdays, charity drives. One frame caught my eye. A collage from the annual Veil benefit, 3 years in a row, my parents in the center, Silas next to them, even Jolene's kids in matching bow ties. But no me, not even the edge of my dress or the blur of my shoes. I blinked. It wasn't that I didn't remember the night. We all wore navy that year. I helped plan the whole thing. I remembered posing for the group shot. I remembered Mom turning to me and saying, "Just take one for the team and step aside this time. We need symmetry." I did. I always did. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the frame. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just knew. This wasn't memory loss. It was erasure. I left, headed straight to Tanya's office. She was already scrolling through donation receipts and committee records I sent her last week. I dropped the flash drive on her desk and said, "Add this." She loaded it, eyes widening as she clicked through photos and documents, evidence of my involvement in every major project we'd funded for the past decade. She started drafting. Title, Unseen Hands, The Invisible Architect of Veil's Legacy. It was honest, sharp. I could feel the truth cutting through every paragraph. She sent the draft to the local paper editor. But within an hour, Tanya's phone rang. She put it on speaker. It was Lenora. "The article's unbalanced," she said, coolly. "Ari has always struggled with perception. We just think it's irresponsible to publish something so emotionally skewed." The editor didn't hang up. He just quietly muttered, "We'll need more hard sources before we can move forward." I didn't yell. I just sat there and listened. After the call ended, I whispered, "They don't fear my silence. They fear my voice being believed." That evening, I drove to Jolene's. I didn't call, didn't warn. She opened the door wearing that same strained smile she saved for photographers. I held up the phone with the picture of the photo wall. "Why erase me?" Her smile cracked. First guilt, then calculation. "It's not about you, Ari. It's about protecting the family image." I stepped in, closed the door behind me. "Your image, or the version of it you could control?" "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being erased, and you're helping." Her jaw tightened. "You have no idea what's at stake." "Then tell me." "You don't want to go down this path," she snapped. "Keep pushing, and I'll call the board. I'll say you misused funds. I'll say you pressured vendors." "You really want that storm?" I stood there, still. Let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. "You already created the storm. I'm just choosing where to aim the lightning." She didn't follow me out. Back at Tanya's, I sat on the floor of her guest room. We debated, article or video, paper trail or personal story. She believed in the power of print. I believed in something simpler. Voice. I wrote a statement, raw and direct, turned on my camera, held the little star keychain my dad gave me when I was 6, the one I found again just last month, buried in a drawer no one thought to check. I talked, not polished, Not perfect, just real. I spoke about being asked to step out of frame, about being labeled emotional when I asked for credit, about watching my own hands build something while someone else's name went on the plaque. Before midnight, Tanya knocked on the door. The article was stalled. The editor asked for a week. Family input, he called it. I nodded, then hit upload on my video. The title? Invisible No More, The Truth Behind My Silence. Within minutes, notifications poured in. Support, doubt, disgust, curiosity. One message stood out. I always wondered why Ari wasn't in the picture. You deserve to be there. Another hit harder. This feels like a smear job. She's just bitter. Then my phone rang. A local station wanted a live interview. Tomorrow morning. I sat back, let the light from the screen wash over my face. This was the moment. The story wasn't finished, but the silence was. The text came in just after noon. Silas, short, blunt. Family's having a final estate talk. You deserve to be there. Come if you want. Tanya saw the message. Her eyes narrowed. You sure you want to walk into that lion's den alone? I'm not walking in afraid, I told her. Not this time. By 1:30, I was pulling up the gravel drive of the Vale estate. The sun glinted off the windows like it always did. Clean, cold, practiced. The front door opened before I could knock. Silas didn't smile, just nodded and turned. I followed. The dining room had been transformed into something out of a corporate arbitration. Long table, leather chairs, bottled water, a projection screen still blinking in sleep mode. Jolene sat near the center. Redford, the family lawyer, on her left. 2 foundation board members on the right, both avoiding my eyes. I was seated alone at the far end, a single chair waiting. Message received. Silas cleared his throat. Let's talk legacy. One last time. His voice was smooth, measured, like he was already rehearsing a press release. He began without preamble. Ari, this was never meant to be your stage. You were always meant to support, to advise, not lead. Jolene didn't flinch. She chimed in, crisp and detached. You were too emotional, Ari. Too reactive. That energy doesn't represent the family mission. I stared at her. But you used my work, my contacts, my words. Redford folded his hands calmly. Because it worked better that way, quietly. Your childhood journals gave us emotional depth for donors, stories they could connect with. My stomach twisted. He gestured to a folder in front of him, labeled clinical. Narrative assets, emotional anchor, Ari. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, pages I'd scribbled in the dark at 12, 14, 16, trying to make sense of grief, of rejection, of feeling invisible. They hadn't just taken my place. They'd taken my pain and sold it as inspiration. I took a slow breath. Let it settle. Then I laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't manic. Just sharp. Final. You needed me. You just couldn't admit it. Redford shifted, suddenly less composed. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and hit play. The sound from my video, the one now crawling across the internet, filled the room. I watched their faces tighten. Jolene went pale. Then I spoke. You told me I was dramatic. Then you turned that into a donation drive. One board member blinked. Did you really write all that? Yes, I said. At 14. I walked forward, placed a printed page from my journal gently in front of Jolene. Since you're so fond of ghostwriting with kids' trauma, you can keep that one. I didn't wait for their response. I turned and left. No slammed doors, just silence thick enough to taste. Back home, I didn't collapse. I didn't rage. I brewed coffee. Sat at my desk. Opened a folder labeled Legacy Redefined. There they were, faces, names, stories from the community center, people I helped directly, quietly, not for credit, just because someone had to. My phone buzzed. A podcast producer wanted to do a full series on my experience. Long form, my voice, unfiltered. I stared at the message. You can only stay in the shadows, I whispered to myself. If you agree to be unseen, I don't agree anymore. The next morning came fast. I didn't dress like I was going to war, just wore what made me feel like me. Tanya messaged, "They're watching. Say it all." The podcast studio was small, warm, not polished like TV. Better. I sat down. The mic lowered. The host leaned in. "You ready to speak without a filter?" I looked up. "I've waited my whole life for this." A week later, Silas called. Again. He sounded rehearsed. "The Foundation's holding a press event. We're acknowledging your contributions, publicly. It's time to move forward." Then came Redford's email, formal, sanitized. "We recognize Ari's legacy and lasting impact. This is a moment of healing." It was never about healing. It was about image. Still, I went. Not for them, but to look it in the eye one last time. The room at the Foundation headquarters was staged like a morning show set, lights just bright enough to blur nuance. Reporters sat in neat rows, cameras blinked. A branded backdrop stretched behind a podium, the Veil name front and center. Jolene took the stage first, holding a paper with both hands. "We are here today," she began, "to extend our heartfelt acknowledgement to Ariadne Veil. Her behind-the-scenes work made so much possible." It went on like that, impersonal, polished. She called me a quiet architect, claimed they regret past missteps. Then came the moment they thought would sell the story. They named a youth program after me, posthumously, as if I'd died, as if my voice was already past tense. Jolene stepped off stage, placed a hand on my shoulder. A photographer raised his camera. I stepped back. I leaned in just close enough and whispered to Silas, "You still want my image, not my truth." Then I walked past the press handler and took the mic. I didn't plan to speak, but my legs carried me, and my heart had more to say. "Thank you all for being here," I began. "And thank you to those who have reached out over the past week with words of kindness and courage." I paused. "But I won't continue a legacy that was built on my silence." Whispers moved through the crowd. Jolene stiffened. Silas tried to rise. I raised my hand without looking at him. My story isn't theirs to finish. And my healing never needed their permission. I saw a woman in the second row nod slowly. Her eyes welled up. "There's a line I heard in group therapy once. It stuck. Forgiveness is a solo act. So is moving on." I unclipped my name tag, laid it on the podium, and walked off stage. That night, I stood under warm, flickering lights in the Portland Community Empowerment Center. It smelled of coffee and old paint. The room buzzed with voices, not judgment. People I knew, people I'd helped, people who had been invisible like me, gathered to launch our new project. Not a charity, not a campaign. A movement. Quiet. Real. Tanya introduced me. She didn't call me a survivor. She said I was the voice behind the unheard. I stepped up and shared our plan. A foundation by survivors, for survivors. No branding, no photo ops, just people doing the work. We lit candles for those still healing. We hung prints made from pages of my old journal, now turned to something beautiful. Later, I sat beside a teenage girl. She looked down, hair shielding her eyes. "You matter," I said. "You always have." She looked up, didn't speak, but she smiled. As the night settled into soft chatter, I pulled out my mic and recorded the final episode of my podcast series. I called it Final Words. But it wasn't about closure. It was about clarity. I opened a brand new journal, flipped to the first page, and read aloud. "This isn't revenge. This is reclamation." I spoke of boundaries, of naming your hurt and walking forward anyway. They told me to disappear. I learned to draw the lines they couldn't cross. Listeners wrote in. Thousands. From places I'd never been. Saying thank you. Saying me too. "Don't wait for the world to give you space," I said. "Take it, and when you do, fill it with your truth." I clicked stop. Silence. My chest rose, then fell. Peace. Real peace. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It read, "You don't know me, but your story saved me." Signed at the bottom, Miriam Vale, Jolene's estranged sister.